Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this in the world. I hope you guys are doing okay. So today I wanted to do a discussion on the narrative integrity of a fighting game versus its gameplay depth. And what I mean by that is what should take higher priority when a game is being developed and during the game's lifespan. The reason that this discussion has come up is because Bison has recently been added to Street Fighter 6, and there seems to be some people that have taken issue with Bison being in the game. Now the reason for this is that Bison was killed by Ryu in Street Fighter 5, which seemed to bring Bison's story to an end. They had been trying to defeat Bison for a very long time. They had failed almost every single time, and even when it seemed like he was dead, he found a way to transfer his energy into a new body, essentially renewing his lifespan. But it comes to light now that obviously Bison has returned. I'm not entirely sure what the jump is from Street Fighter 5 to Street Fighter 6, but it seems to be quite significant because the lives of some of the fighters in the games have changed quite dramatically. I've seen some people saying online that it's 6 years from Street Fighter 5 because Street Fighter 3 was set a few months after Street Fighter 5 in chronological order. Although it seems to be a little bit hazy, I'm not entirely sure, but there seems to have been a number of years that have passed since Street Fighter 5's events. So in Street Fighter 6, Bison comes back. Now in the story mode, there are plenty of hints to say that Bison will be returning. When you play World Tour mode, they sort of drop these hints everywhere. Now I actually think there's a pretty good reason for why they drop hints for Bison's return in the World Tour mode, but we're going to get to that in a little bit. So like I said, fighting games have always had stories, and they've always been good to have because they help connect us to these characters. I don't think I would have liked Akuma as much, Kazuya, Scorpion, or whoever it might be without their stories. Scorpion is a very good example. People are very attached to the character Hanzo Hasashi. Not so much Scorpion, the man behind the mask, who we all became connected to through these struggles that he went through, his damnation in the Netherrealm and his eventual revenge on Quan Chi. We don't quite have that connection with the new Scorpion because there's no real story built upon him. The same goes for Kazuya beating Heihachi and eventually Jin beating Kazuya. There was a build up in that family feud which made Kazuya beating Heihachi a satisfying conclusion to Heihachi's story, and Jin beating Kazuya also quite satisfying to watch. And this also goes for Street Fighter with the obvious conclusion of Bison. And I'd say people really started to tune into story modes with fighting games when Mortal Kombat 9 came out. They sort of set the benchmark. Now that's not to say these stories didn't exist before. There was comics surrounding these fighting games, there was anime surrounding these fighting games. So people obviously cared to some extent about fighting game stories. And as time has gone on, they have gotten better and better, and we've become more invested in the main storylines of these characters. Stories are also really good to help with marketing. When you're bringing out a new game, you want to sort of angle it in a way where we're going to be paying attention to certain characters, and their arcs are either going to have satisfying conclusions or new characters are going to be brought to the forefront. So it's very good for marketing as well. And they also give the developers reasons to bring characters back or to keep them on the roster. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that there are reasons to have fighting game stories and there are reasons to remain consistent with them. Now then, people are, like I said at the beginning of this video, annoyed that Bison has returned because it ruins the consistency of the Street Fighter story. And this is where the discussion of gameplay comes in. Now, I always give my personal opinions on these videos just to let you guys know exactly where I stand on these things, and then I leave the discussion up to you guys and we have it in the comment section. Having said all of that about narrative integrity and trying to remain consistent with your games, I think that the gameplay depth and the depth of your roster trumps that story every single day of the week. The problem with fighting games is that they live off of their gameplay. They're not like Silent Hill, they're not like The Last of Us, they're not like Until Dawn, they're not like God of War. All of these games have very strong narratives, and we expect consistency in these stories, and you can tell the stories consistently through one character because you control one character through the entire story. In fighting games, there are a multitude of characters to pick from. Everybody has fighting styles that they will lean towards. Everybody has characters that they favor. There's no one character that carries the entire game when you're playing it with your friends. And so I don't understand why people want to hold fighting games to the same standard that we would these single player games like Shadow of the Colossus, like the Uncharted series and so on. Now me being somebody that usually plays boss characters, I usually feel this more than your average fighting game player. Not everybody is into boss characters. Some people like the conventional characters on the roster that you'll see in every single game like Ryu. But unfortunately for me, because I enjoy playing boss characters, most of the time I have to pick a new character going into a new game. And the reason for that is usually at the end of a fighting game they kill the boss character and they bring a new one in. Very rare that you see reoccurring boss characters, and that only tends to be the case in very specific titles. So for example, I used to be a Jinpachi main, had to drop him. Used to play Ancient Ogre, had to drop him. Used to play Algol, had to drop him. And of course, most recently was playing Bison, but there was no sign of Bison in Street Fighter 6. These characters have very big player bases, and so what happens is when they kill them in the stories, they use that as an excuse to not put them on the base roster. Now sometimes I can be sympathetic to this because they have such large rosters for certain games, it can make way for new characters, and you can hold off on bringing them back and using them as a marketing ploy or a way to advertise your game for future installments. For example, if they don't bring back Heihachi in Tekken 8, I can see them using him as a way to sell Tekken 9, to say this is the return of Heihachi Mishima, this is a big reason to get the game. However, what you do is in the 8-year lifespan that will probably have Tekken 8-4, you alienate a bunch of players for the sake of a story. Now I don't personally care if you add the characters into the story, and I don't think you need to have characters on the base roster or as DLC and justify them through story. I think people care about fighting game stories, but I don't think they care enough for you to take away their character from them for 10 years and then hope in the next game they show up. This is the case that I would make for Bison and for the people that are not happy that he has returned. Yes, narrative integrity in games is important, but it's going to vary between genres. It is not as important in fighting games because not one or two characters hold the entire game up. Each character brings with it its own fan base of players. Bison having a gigantic fan base of players. Imagine if Ryu defeated Akuma. Imagine he actually killed him, and then they turned around to us and said, because of the story in Street Fighter, you will no longer be able to play Akuma in Street Fighter 7. And so we say to them, why? Why won't we be able to play Akuma in Street Fighter 7? What's the justification for that? Well, in the 4-hour campaign that you played, Akuma defeated him, weren't you watching? So because of 4 hours versus 8 years that we have this game until the new one comes out, we can't use this character. And in the new one that's coming up, we can't use him again. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Now I don't mean to sound like I am being condescending here, but to the people that are saying that they don't want dead characters to return for the sake of the story in a fighting game, I think you people are being very selfish. Now I have spoken to some people and they've said that we don't mind if they're on the roster, we just don't want them in the story. And I'm fine with that, no problem. I personally don't care about the stories in a fighting game enough for them to be included or not included. I really am not going to lose too much sleep over it. I think that no matter what you do in your story, the gameplay section of a fighting game should come first. So you can kill characters in the story and you can remain consistent within the story, but I don't think that should affect who's on the roster. In Street Fighter's case, if there ever came a day where Ryu was killed in the story, there should never be a time when Ryu is not a playable character. If there is ever a case where Kazuya is potentially killed in Tekken, there should never come a time where you can't play as Kazuya. I know it has happened in the past, but just because it happened in the past and they had a successful game with it does not mean it should happen now. I didn't agree with it then, I don't agree with it now. I know that a lot of people say Geese had died many years ago and hasn't returned since and he's sort of like in an alternate story. I also don't agree with that. I think it's silly. I think these games, although some of them have interesting stories like Mortal Kombat, I think if you kill characters in the story, that's fine and you can remain consistent and keep them out of the story. But if you kill a character like Scorpion, even if you kill the new one, the new Kuai Lang Scorpion, and then you say, right, well there's no Scorpion in the game now because he died, the Scorpion players are going to be like, are you being serious? We care about the story, but we don't care that much. Now I did pull some comments from my comment section regarding this because there were some people that were pushing back on Bison being in the story, so I'm going to read out some of the comments that were made regarding this, and I want to get your opinions on this. I want to know what you guys think. Do you think the narrative in a fighting game is more important than who is on the roster? Do you think dead characters should remain dead and not playable for many years for the sake of the story? Or are you more of the mindset that dead characters should still be playable for the sake of the game's longevity and for the sake of the player base that grew up with those characters? I also want to say that in me reading these tweets is not to bash these people, is not to humiliate them or put them down, but I like having discussions with you guys, and some of you sent in some very long comments and I couldn't get to all of them because there's tons of comments on that video, so I thought I'd reply to you in video format. The Will of D says, I'm sorry Mike, but that not only ruins the story many people care for, but then it makes the stakes feel like it didn't matter. The fact he did die was a big moment for the story. It ruins Kazuya's arc. He's referring to Heihachi here. Just because you don't care for the story doesn't mean others, especially Harada, don't care. Now the way that I see this is that when Kazuya defeated Heihachi, for me he defeated Heihachi in that moment. Tekken 7 came out in 2015 and on consoles it was released in 2017. So in 2017 we all witnessed Heihachi die at the hands of Kazuya. It is now 2024. I don't see what the problem is in bringing character back 7 years later. 7 years he's been dead in that story. I don't see the issue with it. For me, characters die in that moment in fighting game stories. For me, characters win in that moment in a fighting game story. But again, you play a fighting game story for 4 hours and then that's it. That's the game we're stuck with. Now we're in a world where Heihachi Mishima is not playable. And I can bet every single penny in my bank account the overwhelming majority of people, if given the chance to have their main character back for all the Heihachi Mishima mains out there, they would take Heihachi coming back over keeping him out of the game. You would be hard pressed to find the majority that agree with keeping him dead for the sake of the story. Because again, this is the game we're left with now. It doesn't ruin Kazuya's arc for me. Kazuya defeated Heihachi. Like all animes ever, good characters always return because people want to see good characters. I've got another comment here saying Nash died for nothing. Now I have to ask you guys, do you really care that much that Nash came back in the game and failed? Is it really going to ruin Street Fighter for you that Nash failed in his mission to defeat Bison? I've got another comment from the Will of D here saying, Mike, I love your work and I respect your take. Well, I appreciate watching the content, I honestly do, but this was a very lengthy comment, so I'm going to respond to it. I do think I actually typed out a response, but I'll respond here for you anyway so everybody can see it. In your entire point about fighting game stories and characters not meaning a lot is stupid, respectfully saying, and if I capsize a word or sentence, the reason I am doing so is to add emphasis to what I'm saying. It's lame. There is a reason why many people don't like it, because Bison died many times and Capcom tried to move on with the story. They do care to some degree, that is also why he doesn't exist in Third Strike. It was supposed to wipe the slate clean. Bison showed up in other games, but not in the main story of what Capcom had to offer at the time. Shadaloo was dead and gone. Lore-wise, he was dead for years. 3 and 6, that time gap. Then they make JP&G and Gil, who are supposed to take the spot as the big bad guy, but they brought back Bison, killing their chance to really take focus. Story-wise, it's not that great. Now, if this was an anime, or if this was a TV show, like on Netflix or something, I might be inclined to agree with you. I don't like it when you commit to killing a character and then you bring them back. The problem here is that you interact with this, and fighting game players tend to interact with their favorite fighting games for many years. So what happens is, in a show like Naruto, where maybe you might see a character die and they might bring them back and it ruins the whole arc, in this, when you kill a character, you also kill a portion of that fan base. I am living proof of that, and I know there's people just like me where if their favorite characters don't come back, they don't come back to the series. I had a very hard time reconnecting with Soul Calibur, because in Soul Calibur 4 and 5 I connected with Algo, and now for the sake of the story they won't bring Algo back, and so I find it very hard to go back to that game and connect with another character. Now there might come a time where I find a character that I like as much as Algo, but as it stands there's nobody in Soul Calibur 6 that I would want to use, and so I don't play the game. I know there's a lot of people like that were fans of Bison that turned on Street Fighter 6 and said, not really feeling it. I ran into Problem X at Evo Japan, and we were both talking about how there was no Bison in the game and how that he wasn't too happy with it. We both went to E Honda, which was quite funny. I said to him the only character that kind of resembled Bison's playstyle to me on some level was E Honda. He said the exact same thing, but he really wanted Bison back, and I know with the reveal of Bison he must be over the moon, as I imagine thousands of Bison's fans would be. Now you brought up Third Strike. Third Strike's a perfect example of this. They left out so many core characters in Third Strike. The game did not do well. Street Fighter 3 really struggled to get off its feet, and it wasn't until many years later when people started to really appreciate Street Fighter 3. Street Fighter 3 got quite lucky because gameplay wise it's actually a fantastic game, and there are a lot of good characters in that game. But the problem is that when you drop a fighting game and it doesn't have its iconic characters, it can take a while for people to really catch on to it being a good game, if at all. And that was the case of Third Strike. They removed so many characters, so much so that I don't even think Akuma was in it until Third Strike. The only returning World Warriors were Ryu, Ken and Chun-Li, and to a lot of people that was unacceptable. And so that's why you see with Street Fighter 4 they went back to their roots, they went back to what people knew, and over time they added Third Strike characters, and even in Street Fighter 5 they added some more Third Strike characters. And even though Bison was defeated, he is in Street Fighter 5 and once again in Street Fighter 6. The lore does matter, but the gameplay matters more, and that's why these decisions are made. Capcom does care about their stories, but they care about their pockets more, and they know that Bison is going to sell like hotcakes. He went on to say, what you said though about how games have characters who die in lore and can't show up again, buddy, Guilty Gear would love to talk to you. Characters who have died in lore or were only playable for 1 or 2 games never came back. They stuck to it because it's part of the story. Their purpose in that game was used for the game they needed to play. That was fine. You also mentioned SNK. Come on man, they also care for their story. You say those things, but IMO, you didn't really research this point because it's factually wrong. Geese died in the Fatal Fury timeline. He never ever showed up again as a playable character. That would ruin the story they have set up for it. In another timeline, Geese is playable and alive, and in lore they explained why he is alive. There is that split there that makes your argument a bit weak. Now is there anything saying that needs to be a hard set rule? No, the devs can do whatever they want. It's their game, but your argument doesn't work and or falls apart by just using that simple logic. Okay, let's break down this point. Again, I'm willing to bet that if you tell people that your dead character can come back, the people that are paying money to play the game, they will say yes, of course, bring my guy back. Does anybody remember when they showed off Geese in Tekken 7, how crazy people went? Geese is one of those characters that's kind of hard to get your hands on, because he's right, they do tend to keep characters dead in the SNK games. But one of the problems with KOF is that it's always struggled with popularity when compared to its competitors. And I'm willing to bet that if they would stop staying so consistent with their story, I don't know exactly how consistent they are because I'm not in tune with KOF to that degree, but somebody like Geese is insanely popular. If they're keeping him dead for lore's sake, then they're just costing themselves money. Geese is the kind of character that I would play if I saw him on a roster. Keeping popular characters dead in a game where you live and die by the gameplay makes no sense. You're just costing yourself money. You're also being selfish to the people that enjoy playing those characters. It's even worse when they don't repurpose the movesets and they just completely wipe the character. That whole moveset is gone. He then says, for example, you mentioned games have this gap between releases. Keep in mind, no matter the game, some characters will be cut or not even make it met for many reasons. A character like Remy has his fans but only showed up in Third Strike. No cameo, no comic appearances, nothing. His existence was also made to fit a niche, so his value is low. But he won't show up again until Capcom was given a reason to care to bring him back. By your logic, you cut out that fan base. The same with Grant in Mark of the Wolves. He died in Mark of the Wolves, but he now has a student in the next game who fills in his character and shares his moveset. The character is dead, but the moveset is not. You can also hit that hybrid of meeting the fans halfway with characters like Vox, Grant Student, and Garo 2. I can even mention Team USA for KOF. They have not been in a KOF game since 2002. It's a meme at this point, and KOF story as it goes doesn't limit their chances at times. Sometimes in lore they legit can't make it known because someone stole their ticket. But again, by your logic, players who played them are now either going to have to wait 4 years for their show to be in the KOF game again or whatever. Heck, the recent new faces of KOF 14 didn't even make it back to KOF 15. Nelson, Hattori, and Zarina, I can keep going. Even the boss of KOF 14 didn't make it back for 15 because he has no reason to come back despite him being playable in 14. Every dev has done this because of the story. To say that is not true is also false because they have to give a reason for them to come back. Like Charlie/Nash in Street Fighter 5, he died for years and never showed up again because he died. But now they gave him a reason to be back from the dead to later die again. People do care for the story, Capcom does too. If they didn't, the story would never progress that far and the characters wouldn't age. All of Street Fighter 3 was supposed to be them passing the torch to the new faces and foes, but they got backlash for it. So they brought back a few characters and worked with the story in that situation. Again, they worked with the story. SNK and Capcom have a lot of games where they really do pay attention to the story mode. You may not care, but they do, and a decent amount of fans do. So let's pull this apart because there's a lot of things in here which kind of make the point for me. Remy, for example, has fans, probably 2 of them. The reason that they can put Remy in one game and never bring him back is because if you're basing it on a numbers game, nobody cares about Remy. Generally speaking, if Remy never shows up again, nobody's going to lose any sleep. To put Remy in the same conversation as Bison is absolutely ridiculous. If we're talking about a character like M.BISON, then we need to compare him to characters of equal popularity. M.BISON is one of the most popular characters in Street Fighter. Remy is easily one of the most unpopular characters in Street Fighter. The reason he doesn't appear in any comics, the reason there's not a lot of merchandise on him, the reason there's not a lot of figurines on him is because nobody will buy it. The reason there's a lot of merchandise on Bison, even after his passing in Street Fighter 5, is because people like Bison and they want to see him back. Bison and his popularity would be comparable to Heihachi. If you ask the Tekken fanbase, would you like Heihachi as DLC in Tekken 8? I'm willing to bet most people are going to say yes. It would be insane to say otherwise. Now, on the topic of hybrid movesets and passing them on, that can work. We've seen that work with certain characters, and that's completely fine. Unfortunately, Capcom didn't do that. There was no sign that Bison was going to come back if you didn't play the World Tour mode. We were under the impression he was gone. His moveset hadn't passed on to anyone. And on the topic of that, at the beginning of the trailer, he clearly says, I don't know who this Bison character is, but I'll take his name. Now, it's possible that he has amnesia and he just doesn't remember who he is, but either way, doesn't really matter. When you talk about Nash, yes, they came up with a stupid reason to bring him back because there was was demand for it, but the reason they brought him back was kind of silly. He was a zombie essentially. He failed in his mission and he's gone now. Although people asked for Nash to come back, his popularity dwindled very much, and that's why you don't see him in this game. That's why there's no real mention of it. They tried to pass the torch the same way that Akira Toriyama tried to pass the torch to Gohan, and people wanted Goku, and so Goku came back as the main character once again. It's why Goku and Vegeta are at the forefront of the new Dragon Ball series and not Gohan, because people wanted those. You can try to advance your story, but at the end of the day, if the people are not connected to the characters and they want specific characters, that is going to supersede what the story is meant to be. Maybe Dragon Ball to a lesser extent because it's an anime and you can take certain liberties with the story there, but in fighting games, you need to give people characters they want to use. So either you can come up with silly ways to bring them back, or you can just say, here's a playable version of the character, which is ideally what I would like them to do. Got another comment here saying, I mean, it's cool and it blows he is back because it shows they didn't hand over the mantle to the villain. What I would say to that is that the mantle is always going to truly belong to Bison. The evil Shoto is always going to truly belong to Akuma. You can try as you might to pass this on to other characters, but the fan base is too large and they're too dedicated to these characters. They're not going to be able to pass it on. People just simply won't allow it. I highly doubt they'll be able to bring out a character in Street Fighter to match Bison's level of villainy and capture the attention of people the way Bison has. So I understand that people like story modes in fighting games, and I do too. And I even saw a comment on here regarding Mortal Kombat, which I'll read out to you guys before we close off the video because I thought it was a bit of an interesting comment. It's from an individual called Not Matt Murdoch. He said, why is this video stating that fighting game stories are inconsequential when you criticize Mortal Kombat 1 for the repetitive nature of time travel and multiverse use? It seems weird to make that last game about how it's ultimate fall for Bison and how Nash sacrificed himself to take him out just for the attempt to fail and Ryu to clean up. Now the significance of Street Fighter 5 is entirely undone since Bison can just come back and there's no permanent way to get rid of him. You spoke about how Bison players are going to be alienated if he doesn't make a return after being absent for one game, and how it's wrong for the story to determine whether or not he makes it, but doesn't including him have the same effect? Let me just go over this first part here because he sent more messages. No, it doesn't have the same effect. Nash came back and the people that wanted to use Nash got to use Nash. Now in the story he failed, yes, but just because of a narrative piece, it does not put it on the same level of kicking out one of the most popular characters that has ever existed in the franchise for the sake of remaining consistent. Also, on the topic of Mortal Kombat 1, you can criticize the story itself. Like I can say Street Fighter 5 had a shit story, which I believe it did, but you can remove that from the gameplay. So with Mortal Kombat 1, yes, Mortal Kombat 1, in my opinion, in the last 5 chapters, in the last hour of the game, was dog water. That has nothing to do with the gameplay. I've said for a long time, I do not understand why the Hanzo Hasashi version of Scorpion is not in the game. To me, that makes no sense, because the story's over now. Story's finished, we've moved past it. We've just got Mortal Kombat 1, we're just playing online, and we have the boring Scorpion, the tame Scorpion, the lukewarm Scorpion that nobody really has any real connection to. Now you might say, well, it doesn't really make sense to build a new Scorpion in the story and then have the old Scorpion in gameplay, and fine, but then you run into the problem of, well, this is the boring Scorpion that nobody likes versus the crazy Scorpion that we had from before that was much more enjoyable to play. I think that you can separate story from gameplay. I don't think they should go hand in hand. Of course there's going to be crossover, but you can 100% criticize the story of Mortal Kombat 1 and still want the gameplay to reflect certain things. It's not inconsequential within the context of the story, but we're conflating two things here. He says, what about the people who do care about the story and became invested in these franchises for that purpose? What about the writers who took the time to make these stories? Not only have you invalidated the fans, but you've also done a disservice to the writers themselves by saying their stories don't matter. You're correct in that the story won't be the be all and end all factor to whether or not the game succeeds, but to tell people that their interest doesn't matter seems kind of a lame argument, doesn't it? I'm happy you got your character back and I hope you enjoy them. This comment isn't made out of anger. I enjoy your videos and I appreciate that, and my responses are not made out of anger to anyone either. I think there's interesting talking points here. I don't feel like I'm invalidating these people because they got their story. They got their end of Bison. That was then and this is now. Bison was defeated then, but to turn around to an entire fan base and say your character's gone, there's only so many times you can get away with doing that. Third Strike was proof of this. They got rid of so many characters in Street Fighter 3 that it took up till Third Strike for people to be like, okay, this is a good game, maybe we can get invested in it. And even then it was a niche. It wasn't until many years later where people really started to appreciate it. You run the risk of killing your franchise for the sake of the story. So if you want to talk about inconsequential, sure, the story has consequences on the game, but if you were to put in a pie chart, the gameplay is 80%, I would even argue 90% when it comes to fighting games. Again, this is not Silent Hill, this is not The Last of Us, where the gameplay and the story you might be able to say go hand in hand. It's simply not the case with fighting games, and we all know that. You might like a 4-hour story, but your 4-hour story does not supersede the 8-year lifespan of the game, where we have to sit there and play play it without our favorite characters. Now I might turn around to you and say Ryu kills Akuma, he kills Bison, he kills Seth, Gil and Urien. These characters are not coming back. And you might turn around to me and say that's too many characters, Mike. Now we're starting to kill off too many fan bases. Well, where do you draw the line? Is it okay to just kill Bison? How about Akuma? What if Chun-Li dies in the story? It's not just movesets either. People are connected to certain characters. People want to use their favorite characters. I don't particularly want Bison's moveset moved on to somebody else. I want to play with Bison. So in the story, they can kill him, they can defeat him, but you should still have Bison there playable because he's a Street Fighter character. The gameplay and what happens in it is not canon, right? Karin is never going to beat Bison in a fight. Zangief is never going to beat Akuma, but it happens in the gameplay. It's not canon. So I think you should have them separate. I don't think you should see them together. I don't think you should turn around to an entire base of people and say to them, for the consistency of the story, the characters should not return. Anyways, guys, I've rambled on enough about that. I just wanted to cover this topic. I understand some of you like the story, but I don't believe your 4 hours of enjoying the narrative supersede the needs of the players that invest money into the game for years and years to come and support it. I think these characters should be added as DLC like Bison is, and I think that the fan favorite should always be in the game for the sake of keeping the game going. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Anyways, guys, take care and peace.